Hello, Internet, and welcome back to another episode of Meet La Prensa. Viewer, if you like what you see here, be sure to hit like and subscribe. Our guest today is Amy Maldonado, immigration attorney at Maldonado Law Firm in Michigan, and one of the best immigration attorneys in the nation, and one of the most prominent critics of the last, 2, 3 presidencies on their immigration policy. So we've had a couple of big hires, or at least big nominations in the last couple days for leading the Biden immigration portfolio. The first, obviously, being Jadu, and forgive me when she sees this if I got your name wrong, but Jadu has been tapped to lead USCIS, or U.S. Customs and Immigration Services. Now, she still needs to be confirmed by the Senate. But Amy, what can you tell us about Miss Jadu?
So Jadu is, I think she's a graduate of UCLA Law, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And she is known to be a pro-immigration, basically activist. She was formerly the director of DHS Watch. I know that the advocate, I don't know her personally. I don't actually really know her work that well, but people are really excited in the advocacy and the attorney community. So I think it's great. And it continues a lot of Biden appointments of the right people. So hopefully we will also see that she's allowed to implement the right policies, because that has not necessarily followed so far. But she's great, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services needs a lot of work. You know, people don't know that in addition to the Stephen Miller and Trump attacks on the asylum system, and asylum is legal immigration, it is in the law, 8 U.S.C. 1158, Stephen Miller basically put as many bombs and really messed up the legal immigration process for immigrant and non-immigrant visas as much as possible. And so I believe there were more than 500 policy changes. All of them made it more difficult to get a visa, to immigrate to the US, to file for asylum, you name it. So that's a lot of stuff that needs to be undone. But in general, Urjadu, good pick. Just like, Michelle Bernay for the head of the Family Reunification Task Force was a great pick. Just like Sharnya Krishnaswamy from Amnesty International being a senior legal advisor to the DHS secretary is great. Now I'd like to see that come through in some policy. And those individuals are fantastic. What are they going to be allowed to do?
And what are they going to be allowed to do with, like you said, so much Stephen Miller sort of leftovers or holdovers in these agencies that have created this toxic environment, ground them to a halt, made them completely ineffective in doing their job. So another important nomination that just came out this week is Chris Magnus, a cop from the Southwest. And I think that he used to work in Fargo, North Dakota, and he's been tapped to lead the Customs and Border Patrol. So do we know anything about Chris?
He's going to be the first openly gay CBP chief. I know that I've seen pictures of him on the internet holding a Black Lives Matter sign, and that he's an advocate for community policing. So he is definitely somebody who, even though CBP is problematic based on their law enforcement, kind of directive, while they're also charged to deal with humanitarian issues, and those two things don't really go together, he is another good pick. So hopefully he will be able to implement changes in the agency and in the culture of the agency that can make a difference. But great pick.
So we've talked about what Biden's doing right with some of these great picks. Of course, it has yet to be seen whether these translate into results. But what are some things that Biden is getting wrong right now?
So, and I have to give a caveat on this. I see people on Twitter saying Biden's border policy is just the same. Why did we vote for him? And it is true that I would say Biden's border policy right now is about 90% the same as Donald Trump's. However, interior enforcement with ICE, the ability to get a stay of removal, the ability to ask for prosecutorial discretion, the ability to get ICE to reopen old cases, to let people apply for green cards, that is a 180-degree change. That has gone the other direction 100%. And, that's a really big deal. So for me, I practice before the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in my day job doing legal, applications for citizenship and immigration, permanent immigration, green cards, and also temporary work visas and other kinds of visas. But the border policy is terrible, and it remains terrible. So the two big things that Biden has done right is he has stopped the MPP program, and so he is not assigning new people to the Remain in Mexico program, which I think about 70 to 75,000 primarily Central American asylum seekers were placed into. That program was essentially torture. It was an idea of Stephen Miller's to basically make life so miserable and dangerous and terrifying for Central American asylum seekers that they would give up and go somewhere else. So we made people stay in Mexico, homeless, destitute, no way to earn a living, pray for the cartels. And there were, there are over 1,000 documented assaults just by Human Rights First, but there was rampant sexual assault, physical assault, there was murder. It's completely common, and for us, and I've actually had clients who were kidnapped and held for ransom by the cartels. And in fact, just last week, there was a video of this little boy who came across and was asking the CBP officer, "Can you help me?" and crying. That was all over the internet. And CBP, being CBP, released it, in my opinion, to show, oh, these migrants are such bad parents. Well, it turns out mom and the kid were Title 42 expelled, which is a white nationalist Stephen Miller policy that was developed from a 1944 law when Trump got into office. Stephen Miller was like, hey, dirty immigrants bring disease. Let's develop this old policy where we can shut down the border. Can we use it for mumps? No. Can we use it for flu? No. Well, then COVID comes along and he finally gets support for his white nationalist BS policy. So they've been using that policy and just basically returning any nationals of any country who has an agreement with Mexico back to Mexico. So the Central American countries, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. And then what we're seeing with these deportation flights to Haiti and Africa is that those countries don't have agreements with Mexico. And so Haitians seeking asylum, fleeing for their lives from the regime in Haiti, are being quote unquote Title 42 expelled with no fair screening, no review of whether they're going to be tortured or persecuted or killed on their return to Haiti.
So let me get this right. Joe Biden is executing Stephen Miller's white nationalist policies.
That's right.
Because I think everybody agrees. I think if you were to walk into the Western right now and you say, is Stephen Miller trash? Everybody would raise their hand and say, yes, Stephen Miller is trash. Yeah. But yet they're putting Stephen Miller's policies into place. So what's the deal? Why would they do that? Do you have any insights or or opinion about
I can tell you what I think, which is not really an insight, but I think that they're worried about the optics, quote unquote, and the 2022 election. And I think that they may not be wrong. You know, if the right and Fox News can scare people enough with brown people, surge, invasion, blah, blah, over the border, then they may actually gain ground in the 2022 elections. But as an advocate and an attorney, yes, I get that might work, but I wish that the government, instead of basically knuckling under to xenophobes and bigots, would stand up and say, our law provides for asylum. As a country, we made a decision after World War II that we would no longer return people to persecution and torture and death. And we will stand by those values and we will screen these people. And, you know, I get that not everybody has an asylum claim who comes to the border, but a lot of people do. And we decided a long time ago with the whole credible fear process that we also wanted to err on the side of not killing people and sending them to their deaths. Right. And if somebody has even a credible fear that they will be, which is, I think it's a significant possibility of a 1 in 10 chance that they will be persecuted or tortured on return to their home country, we are supposed to give them a full hearing. That is the law in this country. And what I don't ever hear is I never hear the administration defend the law. And that's really frustrating. So what I hear is Ali Mayorkas saying the border is closed. Apply for asylum from your home country, which is idiotic and it's money. Right. I mean, he knows better. Yeah. Asylum is the corollary to being a refugee. Refugees are people who apply based on persecution for the same grounds from abroad. There are no refugee camps in Latin America. They don't exist. They're not on the continent, right? Or they're not in Central America. Like, they're overseas. And so the only way people have to ask for protection is by physically being in the US and requesting asylum. And you cannot stay for 3 years in a country where your life is in danger and you're fleeing because of an imminent threat to you, to wait for
Right.
the US government to make a decision on whether or not you're really at risk. You'll be dead by then.
Right. So, and honestly, I know that there are a lot of reporters here in Washington. They don't put it in their stories, but they've been asking and they've been wondering, like, why is Joe Biden blaming immigrants for this border story instead of blaming Trump? Right? Like, Trump is the
Right.
one who created this catastrophe. Their messaging is completely wrong. And Ali Mayorkas, I hate to say it, but he is definitely somebody with a lot of input in that conversation. So is Juan Sebastian Gonzalez, the new Latin American head on the NSC, who's been
Yeah.
traveling around Latin America meeting with leaders and stuff like that. I mean, these are people that unfortunately, like, they use this whole, like, oh man, there are billboards up in Tegucigalpa saying, you know, come to America because the streets are paved in gold and it's an open border. That's bullshit. Like, like, people are like running away from very dangerous situations. So we talked a little bit about the torture and things like that people are facing on the other side of the border. We actually interviewed Eduardo Samaniego this weekend, who was deported under Trump, and he gave us a very chilling testimonial about being tortured not on the other side of the border, but on this side of the border at an ICE detention facility in Georgia. And one of the things that we wanted to ask people who are practitioners in the field of immigration advocacy and immigration law, is this something that's common? Is torture something that's happening to undocumented people who are being detained by ICE in this country?
Yeah, I would say yes. We know that conditions, especially in for-profit ICE detention centers, are subhuman. That was before COVID, and the way that we have treated both detainees and people who are incarcerated in this country with COVID is horrific. Like, it's terrible. But right now, I'm actually an attorney on a lawsuit in Philadelphia, and literally our cause of action against the government is torture. That's one of the things we're suing them for, of children who were separated from their parents. So yeah, we torture immigrants in this country, and it meets the legal definition. But there are medical abuses. I mean, I think I told you about, we had a child with a 5-year-old child in family detention in Dilley who had a fractured skull and a temporal skull fracture and an epidural hematoma, which is a brain bleed. And ICE was trying to put him on a deportation flight, which you're not supposed to put somebody with a brain injury in a pressurized air cabin. And we had to go to court and go up to a federal court of appeals to get this kid taken to a specialist before the government would admit, yes, there's actually something wrong with him. They said he was fine. And then lo and behold, he actually does have a skull fracture and a traumatic brain injury. And a year and a half later, he's still here. So yeah, no, we've got horrific medical neglect.
We're not only just torturing people, we're torturing children in the border of the United States. We're torturing immigrant children. And torture, not hyperbolic here, torture being...
No, like the legal definition of torture. Yeah.
Yeah, no, Eduardo told us a story about how ICE agents broke his arm in the process of getting him to sign his voluntary release form. They held him down and broke his left arm. Yeah, that's exactly what he did. He did the air quotes too. So last question. Let's say you're on your way to the White House right now to talk with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. What do you tell them?
We have to defend the laws of the United States, and that includes the asylum laws. We need to restore border asylum, and that means fear screening. It also means deportation of people who don't have a credible fear. Now, mind you, 95% of people generally pass their credible fear interview. So most of the people who are coming would be able to enter. But there are some people who just don't qualify. I had one client, an MPP, who just didn't qualify. And you've got to end Title 42. Title 42 is this white nationalist, xenophobic, Stephen Miller policy that was opposed by the CDC for COVID, and they were overruled by Mike Pence. There is no reason that we are retaining this policy. It's offensive. And
so what would you replace it with? Like, let's say Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were like, well, Amy, listen, we're going to put you in charge of rewriting this. What should we be rewriting it with?
So first of all, we have a backlog of people who've been quote unquote metered and also forced to remain in Mexico. There are tons of people in Mexico who've been waiting for years to get a fair hearing. Those people need to be paroled in, and I believe all of them should be paroled in because we've done them such injustice and harm that they all deserve a full and fair chance at meeting with an attorney, establishing their case. And then I think we're going to have some kind of metering at the border because, we do need to control inflows and know who everybody is. And with children in particular, we do need to ensure that they're not being trafficked, which I believe is honestly, not a significant issue at the border. It's much more significant that we're separating kids from their grandmas and their tias and their step parents and whoever else. But this is something we can do quickly and pretty easily. So yeah, there's a lot we can do at the border. I think in general, what's going on with ICE enforcement is actually great. I mean, he's doing what needs to be done. We have a humane system. They're reasonable. They're just being way more reasonable. USCIS is still a mess and nobody cares about it, but I'll give you one example. So, and these are like the little things that don't sound like a big deal. So Stephen Miller implemented a new policy where everybody who files a non-immigrant visa extension or change of status has to be fingerprinted. So if you come in on a tourist visa and you want to do an extension, you have to be fingerprinted. So they then shut down all the fingerprinting centers because of COVID. And then if you missed your fingerprint appointment, if you didn't send a letter prior to the date of your appointment, they would deny your case. There was no way you could fix it. So I had, because in my day job, I represent a bunch of Major League Baseball players. I had a P4, which is the spouse of a professional athlete who missed her fingerprinting appointment because she was actually at spring training in Arizona. And when she came back to Florida, she was with her husband. When she came back, she let me know that she didn't make her appointment. Thank you for telling me in advance. And so I immediately FedExed the government and I said, this is what happened. We need a reschedule. No response. 2 months later, we still need a reschedule. No response. About 3 months later, we still need a reschedule. No response. A month after that, you're denied for failure to show up at your fingerprint appointment. Now, she had a meltdown, but luckily her green card came the next month and she was fine anyway, so she was still okay. But then, this was all last year, mind you, January, I get a new fingerprinting appointment for her. And then
after February, it's been denied.
Yes. And I checked online because I was like, did they reopen the case? I checked. No, the case is still denied as of last fall. But then I get another one in February. So she missed her 2 new fingerprinting appointments that we asked for last year before. I mean, this is how things are functioning. The other thing that's happening is they adopted a policy of denial without a request for evidence. And I have had so many people who file without a lawyer and they leave out, and you're talking about a stack of documents like that thick. Filing for a green card based on marriage, filing for a green card based on a family relationship. They leave out a W-2 and their case gets denied after they have paid $1,225 in filing fees and waited 8 months for a response. They have to restart the process from the beginning. That was a change from the fact that in the past, the policy was if you're missing a document, USCIS is mandatorily has to send you a letter saying, we're missing this document, please send this document. Takes 5 minutes. And this is supposedly for USCIS efficiency. What's efficient about having to reprocess the entire case from the beginning because you're
what was efficient about the Trump White House? Amy, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We can't wait to we can't wait to share this video. Viewer, if you like what you see here, you can find Amy's Twitter in the description to this video. Please like and subscribe to Meet La Prensa. That's a wrap.